Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to move on with this week's theme of the blank song, looking at tracks whose titles are the something song, and today we're going to be looking at Anathema's The Last Song, all three parts. Now, I didn't know this going in, but the three parts are not sequentially on the album. There are two tracks between part 2 and 3, so I'm going to assume, maybe falsely, that while parts 1 and 2 might flow into each other, 2 and 3 do not. But I'm still going to let it go. I don't see the point in listening to the first two parts of this trilogy without the final one, so let's just go for the full thing, right? So, this is Anathema's The Last Song trilogy. Was not expecting that burst of energy. I was counting a much slower tempo.
Tonight, I'm free, so free. For the first time, I've seen a new life. New life starts to breathe. And you
Oh, well, it's also in 5, so that's that.
in some way, and my life
Love the harmonies.
will never be the same. That night, as I dreamed, and I slipped away to another place where you spoke to me of this day. Of this day, and you came to me in some way, and my life will never be the same. And you came to me in some way. My life is like a hurricane,
Wow, I'm counting it in 7 now.
and you came to me in some way. My life will never be the same.
Very overpowering, the building up to this moment. very tense. Every layer has been adding a new emotion. Interesting, they went for the same progression on the same instruments as our intro, but much faster getting through them. Love that cello down there, such a rich low end. It kind of flows. There's 0 seconds, but we do have a fade out into this. Interesting, we've isolated the female vocals for this, and they're a bit more ethereal than we heard last time. Being texturally paired with a lot of different timbres as well. The panning of these other timbres are kind of creating an element where the vocals can stay front and center but feel like they're all around you. Ton of vibrato on that. Almost sounds like a ton of reverb on it instead, but I don't know. I don't know if that's digital or if she just has that tight of a vibrato. It's interesting to remember too that these 2 tracks are the first tracks of the album. This is the sound that we are introduced to the first time we put the CD in. the tension of this part, the raw grit of this guitar punching through a rather ethereal acoustic track so far. Interesting how quickly this song moved. The first track seemed to be quite a bit longer. I was surprised to see there's only a 6-second difference between them. Alright, so we've copied the lead vocal line from the chorus, I think, onto the guitar. A little bit of a country twang in there. So yeah, part 2 and part 3 do not go into each other at all. There is a 5-6 second break here. And we are in part 3 now, which I want to remind everybody is halfway through the album now. This is the halfway point.
Now that I found you, I'm not gonna leave you.
So far, this reminds me a lot more of what I expect from Anathema than the other two did. This one's moodier in a dark way, playing around with isolation rather than these haunting ethereal strings in the backgrounds.
My heart beats for you. Outside my body tonight, in my mind's eye, I need you to hold on. Promise a future. Dreaming in color.
Yeah, so we're in 5 here. I forgot to check our time signature on part 2.
Spirits reflecting. The feeling is so real. Beauty is endless. Tonight,
I like that.
in my mind's eye, I need you to hold on.
Hey, we return back to the 7 idea from part 1. There is a symbol that's consistent. I think it's in 4. Very cool polyrhythmic thing. It's interesting that this one doesn't bring in a lot of that tension now that we've hit all of the elements. That right there is a very strong a very strong chord for signifying positivity and strength. And that's what they ended on. Interesting. So I'm not going to go into too many details given that this is 17 minutes of music. I can't remember all that. But I am going to talk about some general concepts that were utilized in all 3 of these, and honestly, they're extremely similar. It's kind of fascinating to watch them approach a single concept in so many directions, and it really is a single concept. There's very few differences between these 3 tracks. Even their lengths are more or less similar. They're all right around 5:30. A little more, a little less, but they all showcase the same compositional ideas, structure, building blocks, techniques. So let's get into it. The first thing we have to talk about is foundation. I think is the best word to use for this. Each song is based on a single idea. That idea gets modified sonically, but not rhythmically, and not too often melodically either. We add more layers to it, we give it more context, but it doesn't really change. For songs 1 and at least the latter half of part 3, it might have been in the previous half of part 3 as well, but I didn't pick up on it. With the boom ba boom ba bum bum boom ba doom ba dum bum boom ba doom ba dum bum. That rhythmic pulse underlines at least half of this entire trilogy, maybe more. It could very well be in parts 2 and the first half of parts 3, just hidden a bit more so than I was looking for. In which case it would be ever present through the trilogy. It is played on a variety of instruments and has a couple of small rhythmic variations that we are given, but for the most part, it is the heartbeat of the song. All of the lead instrumental parts are based off of that. around that, we were given our atmospheric things, and this is what gives each of our tracks personality. What instruments are around this core beat? What are these instruments doing to create atmosphere? In tracks 1, we had a lot of string elements holding out these suspended tones, and they were filling in a ton of space. Track 2, we took this suspended notes element just a hair further and put a ton of reverb on them and made them very ethereal. They weren't just filling in all of the space around this rhythmic pulse, but they were also bleeding into each other. Whereas when we had our string instruments in part 1, there was these very abrupt stops between the notes. You could feel when one chord stopped and the next began, and here everything just kind of bleeds together. It gives it that ethereal element where you don't really hear a start or a stop, you just kind of feel the background shifting behind this core pulse. We also have things like effects. What kind of sonic qualities do we have on these instruments? And there is a little bit of reverb in our first part, but that reverb is massively expanded on our second part and completely removed in our third part. And even that right there, the first half of our third part, um, removes pretty much all of the background and gives us just our core pulse for a majority of the track. It is hyper focused on the grounded experience. What is the most basic component of this song? Just the pulse, that riff, and our vocals, and excluding everything else. And so, despite each of these songs having very similar concepts to them, being built up the same way, they're all crafted with different identities in mind to showcase different feelings. Now, that's not where they end either. We can also look at vocals. Our vocals, for the most part, are uniform. I think there is a verse chorus back and forth because we do have two different rhythmic structures for our vocals, but for the most part, they are interested in sparseness. We will get two or three syllables, and then just as much, if not more, rest before we get the next two or three syllables. We are told this story in extremely short, bite-sized pieces. It would not surprise me if it took us minutes sometimes to get a full sentence from any of these three songs. The rhythmic structure of the vocals is similar throughout all of them. But another thing we need to take into account is who is singing and how are they singing, I think is also an important one. We have a male and a female vocalist, and sometimes they are doing a duet and sometimes they are soloing. The male vocal in the first one is a bit more airy, I think is the word I want for it. It's lacking power. It's lacking that air pressure to really come across as not. It's just missing that full body to it, I think is where I'm going at. And the vocals are in that middle range as well, as we'll see when we get to the second track, which is female vocals in isolation, and it is a bit more airier than we already had and has more of an ethereal element to it, where it almost feels like there is a lot of air being pushed out alongside the vocals. And that brings us to our third track, which reunites our two vocalists, but there's more power, there's more air pressure in our male vocals. They seem to be more determined, or whatever attribute you might want to put towards this stronger set of vocal delivery, paired with female vocals that are also a bit more defined in the body of the sound. That etherealness is still there, but it isn't as wispy. Does that make sense to anybody? As the second track. And so we even have a mini story being told through the vocal delivery. I'm not sure what that story is, but it's not by accident. I think that these three songs have completely different usages of the vocals, their timbres, the colors of the vocals themselves, alongside the words, which we'll dig into a bit and see what's going on there. Now, all three of these songs are slow burns. We are introduced to the foundational concept first. It is that core pulse, rhythm, riff, lick, whatever you want to call it, that will be present through every section of the song. The only time this doesn't happen is in the third one when we reintroduce the lick from the first track into the end of the third track to bring it full circle in a sense. I don't know what they're trying to do there. It's definitely a callback, but it isn't like a little one-off homage to it. It is brought in as the new core section. I assume it's supposed to bring in or revisit some of the, maybe we even revisit the lyrics. I don't know. It revisits the concepts though of part one in this new context where each three of these songs have different emotional concepts to them. And hearing the ideas, our musical ideas in our first song is supposed to, I would assume, showcase some sort of change or you ever you ever go someplace where you have really strong memories for and you go there 10, 15 years later and you're a different person and you don't feel quite the same way about that place now? The context has changed. The location hasn't, but who you are has. And that's kind of what I'm getting with this. And that's usually what I get with a lot of callbacks like this, where it's not a one off, but a recontextualization of an old idea is to showcase how things have changed. And that would be my guess for that one as well. Because the three tracks go through quite an emotional journey. The first song is melancholic, but not dark. The second one is, it continues on with the melancholy, but it does so in a more, I'm going to use the word again, ethereal manner. The much heavier use of reverb and lack of harsh stops between chords and ideas and just the flowy nature of all of the notes kind of gives it this intangibility. Is that a word? this intangible element that makes me think of etherealness, non-corporeal elements. And then our third one returns to, again, harsher starts and stops. It brings back that physicality of the notes, but it also does so without a background string section or chords or anything at all in the first minute or so. And through that, we can hear a little bit more darkness in the core lick that we have paired with the vocals, but this eventually gets flipped because the only track that does this, we have a tonal shift in the latter half where we end up doing something a bit more triumphant. And I guess that's not correct to say that it's the only one with a tonal shift. All three of these songs are slow burns, and as such, we gradually recontextualize what we're hearing. Most of the time, though, especially for our first two tracks, each additional layer compounds and adds to the vibe we originally got. Track 1 does get a bit heavier. Track 2 does introduce an electric guitar that punches through this etherealness. I don't know. It's some sort of determination for physicality, possibly. I'm not really sure. Again, the meaning of much of this. I mostly just heard all these themes poking out through the song, but they still retain the heart of the track. And track 3 is the one where we shift from something a bit darker to something a bit brighter. In fact, it's the only moment of the entire trilogy where there is, I think I said victory earlier, and I'm not sure that's correct, but there is something wholly positive. There is nothing ambiguous about it. I even pointed out that second to last chord, third to last chord, was extremely dominant. There is no way to interpret that last moment as anything but positive. Now, what that positivity could mean, I don't know, but it does stand in stark parallel to the darkness, the hopelessness, the sorrow that we've experienced thus far. It's a fascinating trilogy of tracks, primarily because, as I mentioned at the start, they are all slow burns that start with similar ideas, build up through layers to further compound on that idea, finish each of the songs at a high point that has recontextualized the emotive aspect and has used highly repetitive vocal melodies and rhythms to complement the already repetitive nature of the fact that everything's based off of these single foundational concepts, but does so in a way that 17 minutes in, I wasn't bored. I wasn't ready to move on. Part of me wants to say it's the slow burn element. If I'm not engaged with something, I only have to give it 30 or 40 seconds. There will be something new for my attention to grab onto, and that might help recontextualize something else. And I can go back and say, oh, this is now doing this because we hear this with it. And the more layers that get added onto, the more times I can retread and revisit older concepts that had been stacked on top of things. But slow burns like this don't always hit me like that. There have been plenty of times that I've talked about the slow burn saying I appreciate how they keep adding new things, but I was still ready for us to hit the peak and move on. And this is a series of songs that doesn't do that. They hit their peak, start over, and do another slow burn. And then we hit a peak, we start over, and we do another slow burn. But I wasn't done with it, which is fascinating on top of the fact because these aren't supposed to be listened to back to back. Part 1 and 2, sure, but there's 12 and a half minutes of music between parts 2 and 3 on this album. I'm really curious what this concept of cycles, how it's going to tie into the lyrics. I mean, if it even does at all, but each of these tracks is the same song that kind of goes in a different direction. There's a lot of parallelism going on here. I'm curious if that gets touched on at all. I think that just about hits it. The core concept, the emotional change and emotional journey, all the different. Yeah, I'm gonna hit some lyrics and we'll see what's going on here. It's a love story. That much I got. There's a lot of specifics kind of missing, going over my head. I don't know. It starts off, says, tonight I'm so free for the first time I've seen new life. And I start to breathe. And I don't know what that is. That could mean a lot of things. There is a history of control or feeling trapped or enslaved or any, and this could go in a lot of different directions, especially since I feel like there's a supernatural element to this song, but it doesn't have to be, but that's what I get from the music. And because of that, this could take a supernatural twist as well. But I think the important part is that our male vocalist has felt constrained. And on their first day of freedom, or of feeling free, was the day that this person came into their life. It says, and in some way, you came to me, and my life will never be the same. What's really cool is that there's a small break here, if I remember correctly, and we had a very whispery part of the female vocal. It was kind of pushed into the mix. It says, and one day you'll feel me, a whisper upon the breeze, which is actually a line from part two. I like that. I like that a lot. After this, though, I think is when we get the duet. And we have a repetition of this idea, and you came to me in some way, and my life. And then this next line changes. My life will never be the same. My life is a hurricane. And then we end with, for you're mine and I'm yours for life. And our male vocalist repeats, this fear is just an illusion. There is a lot to unpack here that I'm sure a lyricist or a poetic analyzer might be able to dig into that I can't. But what I read is that these two people came together almost like magnets, drawn to each other. And as they got closer, the pull was more and more. As they get close together, it's a violent snap, a really quick snap. Um, and the two influenced each other exponentially. But there was an issue with it. It says the fear is just an illusion. There's an issue with this relationship. Maybe says tonight I'm free. Maybe that implies tomorrow he isn't, and there will now be a divide between them somehow. I don't quite know what the problem is, but it does seem like there is a fear that despite wanting to be in each other's lives, they won't be able to. Which takes us into part two, which is spoken entirely from the female perspective and is about meeting this other person and becoming unafraid of life. Much like how the male vocalist at the beginning spoke about feeling free and meeting this person and knowing their life would never be the same again before going into their duet, where they talk about how they came into each other's lives and then nothing will be the same. We now get that same opening idea. Parallelism in here is real strong, I'm telling you. We get the male vocalist saying, wow, things are crazy now. We get both of them together saying, wow, things are crazy now. And then we get just the female vocal saying, wow, things are crazy now. It's a really neat passing on of the torch. Interestingly, the male character's freedom is brought up again, but in correlation to our female character's non freedom. Why can't I think of the opposite word of freedom? Constraint? It says, in a lifetime, there's a moment to awaken to the sound of your heartbeat, and you're free now, and I will remain still dreaming. And this is an interesting line. Still dreaming. It says, alive and aware of the love that I once believed in. So remembering this relationship. And one day you'll feel me, a whisper upon the breeze, and I'll watch you stand there unafraid. So there will be this faint echo, and you'll remember me, and you won't be afraid of this feeling. Which ties back into the idea that fear is just an illusion. Our main character is not afraid of the repercussions of this relationship. It says, I'll speak to you silently and know that you'll hear me. Come back to me and please believe. This feeling is more than I've ever known. I can't believe it was just an illusion. So their love for each other is stronger than anything she's felt, and because of that, she refuses to believe that it was just an illusion, even though they are now separated. What separates them? What is this fear that we read about in the first track? That I don't know. Part 3 brings us back to the male perspective, and it brings in the ideas of spirits and out of body experiences and reflections and all sorts of really great imagery for a supernatural twist on this. Interestingly, the first line is, now that I found you, I'm not going to leave you. Is this supposed to be paired with his thoughts from part 1, or is this chronologically after part 2 where they were separated and she whispered on the wind and he heard her voice and came to her again? I don't know. He says, tonight in my mind's eye, though, I need you to hold on. Says, a promise of future, dreaming in color, being together, spirits reflecting. The feeling is real, the beauty is endless. Tonight in my mind's eye, I need you to hold on. And that makes me think that they're not physically with each other. The feeling is real. These spirits are reflecting. We are dreaming in color. We are promised a future. And in my mind's eye, what I can see in my thoughts, I need you to hold on to that image. We end the track with, because love is what we are, how near or how far, and life will bring the truth in dream. That's the second time dreams have been brought up. The first time was in part 2 when she had mentioned she was dreaming while the male character was free. I don't quite know what all of this means. There is a story here of two lovers separated by space, time, dreams, peering into other realities. I don't know. But that just simply being able to feel each other on the periphery of reality is enough for them to keep fighting for their relationship. And that's a very powerful message. Or story, I should say. Not really a message. It's a powerful story. And it's told in an interesting way. Assuming that our female voiced character is supernatural, extra dimensional, and her peering in and seeing this other person is something akin to dreaming for her race or whatever, puts that on a separate level than our male character, who, at least musically, has motifs of more grounded elements. There is that separation there. When they are together musically, we have that strong, clear acoustic instrumentation, and we have the ethereal, suspended strings. When we get either one of them in isolation, though, the music shifts to accompany that. Our female vocalist is surrounded by ethereal high reverb sounds. Even her vocals are high reverb. It creates this element of, like I had mentioned, non corporeality, where these notes just don't seem physical. They morph and mold more so than change. When we get the isolated male vocals, we lose a lot of the suspended elements. We lose the reverb. It's grounded, it's rooted, it's something that can be played on just an acoustic instrument without effect pedals or electricity or anything like that. It is of a different plane. And I love how the music ties into the characteristics of these people and or their surroundings. And it makes it so that when they come together for their duets, it creates this beautiful multi-layered music that exists on both planes. The songs also follow a bit of this pattern in the emotional layering as well. Part one I had mentioned was a bit melancholic, and I don't know that I necessarily feel that, but there is a sense of danger in the lyrics. While these two people have come together and speak very highly of each other, there is that bit at the end that says that fear is just an illusion, and it leads us directly into part two where they are separated. There is an underlying danger or fear to this relationship that possibly has caused them to be separated. And that's where part two's primarily melancholic vibes come from, is that this person wants to be reunited and can't. Part three starts out with somebody wanting to be reunited and can't, and that's why it is a bit darker. But when we hit the second half, we hit the duet section, the music rises and escalates into something a bit more powerful, which is where we hit the primary meat of the story, which is that our love prevails no matter where we are. It's this big triumphant understanding of their relationship, and the music matches that. So far, it's not my favorite Anathema song. That's probably going to go to something off of that one album I like. Wow, fantastic, Bryan. Why can't I think of this album? Anyways, I don't want to spend too much time sitting here. Find Day to Exit. There we go. That album will just always have a special place in my heart, and there's songs on there that hit me in a way that a love song trilogy isn't. But this is a very good song from them, and I think it showcases a lot of their artistic chops, which honestly I think is one of their stronger suits. They write a lot of moody, repetitive music in my experience, and this fits right into my understanding of them as a band. And it really is the emotive draw, that emotional connection with their songs that I find to be their strongest suit. And to craft a song like this that is just completely interconnected on every level across all three songs, to create this larger tie of connectivity is massive. That is exactly why I'm drawn to these guys. So, those are my thoughts on Anathema's The Lost Song, part 1, 2, and 3. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I stated or correct me on? Let me know. Above the comment section, there's a description box. In there, you'll find a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. You can find my music in there. You can find a link to the Discord community, and you can find ways to support the channel, as well as a ton more. There's just a lot of links in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, we have a special selection coming up next. If you're watching this live, it's probably over by now. I say live, I mean as soon as this dropped. It aired 21 minutes ago. So go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. As usual, we're going to wrap this week up. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.